I have
saw
a
her
lot of
last
respect
year.
for her.
I saw a presentation of hers last year and it was infectious. And I said, we got to get her. So with that, I think I'm going to go ahead and start. Hi, everybody. My name is Catherine Bryla, and I'm a team member of Sag Moraine Native Plant Community. We are a 501c3 all-volunteer nonprofit environmental organization in the southwest and west suburbs of Chicago. Our motto is restoring our environment one plant at a time. What we do is encourage native plants and ecological landscaping throughout suburban, urban, business, and public landscapes. We do this through community outreach. We're doing farmers markets. We're doing presentations to libraries, presentations to municipalities. We're starting to work with municipalities to guide them and help them to incorporate more native plants in their parks and in their community spaces. We have, for those who become members, we have special members meetings, we have contests and giveaways for members and social events, which hopefully will become more prevalent as time goes on. We are going to be having our first native plant sale in the spring. So we're going to be working hard all winter trying to get that rolling. That this will be a big learning curve for this. So, and also some hopes and plans that we have for next year are to also try to not only touch base with homeowners and libraries and municipalities, but also start reaching out to some businesses and getting businesses on board and corporations on board. So we have big plans. We're very zealous. So for those of you, I want to thank everybody for joining us tonight. And please take a look at our website, sagmoraine.org. If you like what you see, if you like what we stand for, please follow us on Facebook and Instagram. Consider making a donation or becoming a member, or hallelujah, volunteer. The more volunteers we have, the more native plants we can get in the ground. And as an aside, two of the things that we are trying to do as an organization is, one, try to do a little PR work for native plants. Unfortunately, native plants have gotten a bad name, and a lot of people consider native plants weeds. So we're trying to dispel a lot of that and show how most weeds are actually non-native plants, and show the beauty of native plants and how so many of them really do work quite well in smaller landscapes. And we're also trying to do PR work for our little insects. Mosquitoes have given them a bad name, I think. And, you know, as, insects are basically the foundation of our food chain. And we have to start thinking differently of insects as their numbers decline. We have to stop thinking of them as a nuisance, but rather as life-saving little critters that are trying to do a lot of services for us out there. And especially our bees, our native bees, who we need for pollination. And we don't need that just for our food supply. We need that for our forests and our natural areas, and to help curb climate change and so on. We need those native bees, and unfortunately their numbers are declining rapidly. And the yellow jackets have again given some of our bees a bad name, and most of our bees are quite peaceful. Many of them don't even have stingers. And so part of our effort to help the PR of bees was to invite Brandie here tonight. I saw her last year, and her enthusiasm and knowledge about our native bumblebees is amazing, and it's infectious. And you don't only have the knowledge, you have the passion and the enthusiasm, and I just glean that off of you. So before I turn this over to Brandie, I want to ask everybody to, because we're having some issues because of a storm that's going on here, we want to try to save bandwidth. So we're asking that everybody, while Brandie is giving her presentation, that everybody turn off their video and their mic. so that we'll have as clear of reception of Brandie as possible. So with that, I'm going to turn off my mic and video and hand it over to Brandie.
Wow, Catherine, thank you so much for this opportunity. I really appreciate this chance to speak on behalf of the bees. It seems like such a big task on my shoulders. I really take this very seriously. And it just really come from like a humble background, really as a mom, as someone who just, considers herself a citizen scientist, not formally trained in any of this, but just I really appreciate the opportunity to share what I've learned along in my journey following bumblebees around with my camera. And just thought I'd start out here. Hopefully you can you see my screen right now? Just checking in. Hopefully you can see this. Getting to know the native bumblebees in your
We are seeing it perfectly.
Excellent. Okay. Well, I live up here in McHenry County, and in 2010, this would have been the view in a very popular corridor facing north. And I remember hawk circling above on a regular basis. This is a mighty looking oak tree. And I realized there was going to be development that took place here. So I remember wanting to just remember this precious space. And 2019, this was the view of that space. So, being kind of on this front line of suburban sprawl and development, I feel like I've had a front row seat to the shrinking habitat, and it's become a real reality to me. And it kind of sends home the fact how important our backyards really are in creating these safe havens for insects and wildlife that would benefit them, but also ourselves as we get to know them better. But back in the early, maybe 2006, 2007, I could say this was my gateway bee to this conversation about bees. My neighbor had a hive, and they kind of had adopted him and swarmed in his tree. He figured out how to get them in a box, and it was not a reported hive or anything. He just adopted them and tried to care for them. And over 3 years, they kept dying, and he would get another batch. And he invited me in, and I was able to take some pictures. And I remember being really eager to try to, get to know my camera, get good images of bees. But this really was the beginning for me of this conversation about bees. And if I were to think about when I first started getting bumblebees on my radar, I can say I grew up in an apartment living until I went off to college and graduated. But apartment living, I really have no formative memory of bumblebees growing up. But these 4 children of mine really helped to kind of open my eyes, seeing kind of the way they interacted with bugs in general when they were younger. They would actually practice catch and release of bumblebees on this little rose bush that I had in the front of the house. And I really just couldn't believe how courageous they were. Little Sylvia would get stung on occasion, and she would just go back for more because they were just so interested in these little furry creatures that attracted their eye. So really, that's what got me at least noticing them more. And then I started picking up my camera and trying to get good pictures of them. And it was frustrating in the beginning, but over time I started to hone my photography skills and take better pictures that bring out their personality. But as time went on, I just found myself falling more and more in love with them. I mean, what's not to like about these fuzzy teddy bears of the bumblebee of the bee world? They really just draw you in when you start seeing them more closely and paying attention. They're a workaholic with a clearly defined mission. All the times I chase them around with my camera, they're just so focused on what they're doing, and they don't seem to mind that I'm staring at them. And they excel at what they do. And you look at all of the pollinators, which I respect them all, but bees are up there at the top of our most important pollinators. But the bumblebees in particular are the highest quality pollinator that we have. They're vegetarians, and so there's something that kind of resonates with me about that they aren't carnivorous. That's a nice plus. They're an Amazonian feminine kingdom ruled by a queen, where males don't sting and are at her service. And really that has a nice ring to it as well. They don't see the color red, which you kind of typically associate with anger and being angry, but they do have this UV light superpower, which is super impressive, and 5 eyes, kind of like something out of a sci-fi movie. They really, the more I've gotten to know them and read about them, they used to be referred to as the humblebee. And I really latched onto that. And that really speaks to me, the word humble, down to earth, from the earth. That's something that they are just a daily, when I see them, they're a reminder of that to me. So as I've gotten to know more and read more about our native bees and the plight that they face, you kind of get this impression that honeybees take the spotlight. They're the darlings, of the bee world. And I can see how it's happened. A lot of the mainstream media has emphasized honeybees to such an extent that there's a lot of confusion, and maybe, much to the native bees' detriment. And hopefully this is changing. I really feel optimistic that the conversation is shifting, and native bees are included more in people's understanding. So why care specifically about our native bees? 40% of the bee species are declining or threatened with extinction. That's 700 in North America alone. That's just alarming. They provide the bulk of the pollinating of our native plants, not just from an agriculture standpoint, but strictly our native plants and our ecosystem. They're uniquely specialized for that service. If we'd be facing ecosystem collapse when you lose a keystone species like a particular bee, and you're kind of, it sends ripples effects through the ecosystem, affecting the plants. If you lose a plant, you're losing any wildlife that depends on it. I've read a lot of different numbers about the economic value attached to just native bees in particular, but from what I've read, there's definitely enhanced agricultural yields when we're planting to include them in an agricultural setting, in rows or pollination strips and whatnot. And they're providing this service free, yet we certainly benefit from that. They are an insurance policy where the sole dependence on honeybees is very risky. Honeybees are essential. We need them the way our agriculture system is set up, but just depending on them alone is not prudent. And they are difficult to study. Our native bees don't like being manipulated. They are very difficult to study. They're underfunded. A lot of the funding, obviously is flowing through honeybees, and bumblebees as well. So native bees in general, there's a lot of data that still needs to be accumulated, and taxonomic deficits that are there. They really do add to the quality of life. If you look at the topic of biodiversity, it is shown to improve moods by having more species in an area to interact with or to enjoy. And they really are a gift to be treasured. So just to really send home like how important bees are, my daughter made this wonderful pizza that we all know and love. We all love pizza. And all of these topics are brought to you by bees, and you can thank a bee for pizza sauce, mozzarella cheese. Yes, the alfalfa had to be pollinated to be able to feed the dairy cattle to be able to put cheese on your pizza. But all of these items we can thank a bee for. And this pizza would be very, very sad if we did not have bees. You'd only maybe have the dough and some pepperoni on there. So from here on, I would like to propose that anyone within hearing of me would consider the Rusty Patch Bumblebee the new gateway bee from now on into a conversation that needs to continue. And this was a Rusty Patch Bumblebee that visited my yard back in 2019 on some Joe Pye weed that I happen to have a lot of in my little backyard. So this is a bee that's faced 87% decline. It's on the IUCN red list. It is critically endangered. The range you can see on this graphic has shrunk down to just very small areas, including Northern Illinois, where we live. And so it's very possible you could still spot one of them in your area. So when you look at all of the bumblebees, there's 28% of them in Canada, US, and Mexico that are considered threatened, and this is one of them. So don't feel sad for this particular bee. This was just a bee taking a nap, but just why are the rusty patches and other bumblebees facing these problems? There's habitat loss. Actually, I can't see this part of my screen, unfortunately, but there's habitat loss and fragmentation, as I kind of alluded to, even in my lifetime, the fragmentation I'm seeing even in my county, it definitely chips away at the populations of various bees trying to carve out a living in those areas. The truth is there is poor nutrition due to, competition with non-native species, of which our friend the honeybee is considered a non-native species. And it's pretty well documented that they can outcompete some of our native bees, unfortunately, with as good as they are at bringing foraging and bringing the resources in a given area back to their hive. Pesticides, this could be a talk all in and of itself. It really needs its own attention just to devote an entire talk to pesticides. I think we all can agree. Neonicotinoids, which are actually impregnated in a lot of the agriculture products. Big box stores use them on a lot of their plants. We definitely need to shift our thinking away from pesticides and get away from using them as much as possible. Pathogens and parasites are pathogens, at least for the rusty patch. That's a big one that's playing out for them. Nosema bombi is a fungus that it's kind of entered the wild populations from escapees from commercial bumblebee operations, where they're pollinating tomatoes in these commercial greenhouses, and just unfortunately by escaping into the area surrounding those operations, it kind of spreads the disease, and that gets into the wild populations. And climate change as well is impacting them and kind of putting things out of sync for our bees. So what we really could use at this point are just more, I call it bumblebee holders. People out there, with their eyes open and senses aware, looking and getting to know the bees in their neighborhood. And so I think I heard that John Asher quote that bees are kind of where birding was in the 30s or the 40s. At this time, we need a little more organization. We need more infrastructure. We need people communicating together, getting together. So I'd love to see groups like that on the right out there looking more just specifically for bees and kind of exploring what bees are in their community. My husband here is demonstrating these binoculars that we got that are more for like close up viewing. They're really super awesome. I highly recommend them, Pentax Papillo or something like that. But this brand has been super awesome for close up viewing, especially if you have difficulty seeing small moving targets like that. They help a lot. So it kind of makes the this little bumblebee kind of come alive, kind of like this picture here. This is a Bombus fervitus on pasture thistle in my friend Pat Sullivan's backyard. And the more you kind of are drawn into their world, the more you kind of find yourself asking, what kind of bee, what is this bee's name? And I think everything kind of starts right there, focusing in and kind of discovering what this bee's name is and getting to know them. So for me, photography has been a super helpful tool. Getting on out, not like obviously in this picture, I highly recommend you don't go out wearing flip-flops, you wear long sleeves, appropriate attire, but just getting out there and doing some surveys, just taking pictures. And really once you start getting decent pictures, you can narrow down kind of what it is you're looking at. So in Illinois in particular, we have around 11 different species that you could possibly see depending on where you're living. So there were 18 that historically had been collected in Illinois over the years. So you can see how that number and the range has been, shrinking down. 3 of which are endangered or threatened. So there is a possibility you might have some of those bees visiting your area, visiting your yard. So for me, kind of the evolution of this little curiosity with bees and chasing them with my camera, I realized once I started getting good pictures, I could submit them to places like Bee Spotter and Bumblebee Watch, which is a program that Xerces Society puts out. So those two, websites have been awesome at helping me along and furthering my understanding of what the bees are that I'm looking at. So you basically take your picture, you upload it to the site, and they really have helpful tools that they've really zeroed in on that help you look at the features of the bee in your picture, and then an expert will come along and verify what it is you're seeing. And for me, my Bumblebee Bible is this particular book, Bumblebees of North America. I'm looking at it several times a week as I'm trying to get further along my abilities to identify bees. And as I've kind of gotten more into this, iNaturalist has been a real go-to source for me. There's really wonderful search features that they have where you can enter your location and plug in, using the filters and whatnot, and zero in on what bees have been found in your area. That's helpful too. And then it kind of helps you zero in on identifying what it is you might have been seeing in your own yard or whatnot. But iNaturalist is an excellent platform as well. And the other cool thing about it, I'll just throw out there, is if you visit family in Florida or go to Portland for some reason, you can explore bumblebees in any area you travel to, which is super awesome. And that's another way it's kind of played out for me. It's kind of a fun thing of discovery, no matter where you travel, to be able to kind of see what the different features are in the different regions. And so when you're trying to narrow down your identification on your bees, the head is a super important feature. So when you're getting your pictures, you end up with a lot of bumblebee bum shots like the one on the right here, but it is also helpful to get a picture of the head and the thorax. And you're also looking at what's going on all of these tergium, T1, T2, T3. They all are helping you narrow down what it is you're looking at. And some of the things I really love about photography is that it is a non-lethal method of doing surveys. It's super, unimposing in that way. It's easily shared and stored. By collecting these images, you have a good record of what the bee was foraging on. And I think for me, as much as I've gotten into doing surveys for our conservation district and in my own yard, I think that I always come back to the art of photography as kind of a driving force for me, where I really just want to do the bees well by getting a decent picture of them that helps tell a good story about what it is they're up against. For example, you see this one on the left. It's interesting this time of year after they've worked so hard, they start losing their hair. This makes it actually more difficult for me sometimes to identify what the bee is, because they start balding and losing their hair, but they really are endlessly fascinating. And the more you go down this rabbit hole, like I've experienced, you start being able to tell between females, which these two images are. Anytime you see a bee that has a corbiculate with this pollen on its tibia, that's a female. They can sting, but then the more you start taking images, especially this time of year, you'll be seeing more males out and about. They leave the nest and stay out of the nest, and they pretty much have I think I read one time there's like 1 in 7 chance of hooking up with another queen, with a female. But this Bombus griseocolus just perches, and a lot of times you can see they have like one more additional segment in their antenna or other features that really point towards male. And there's a lot of different color morphs that make it a little trickier in your identification, but you get better the more you do it. So some of the usual suspects that you will discover probably in your backyard. Even today I saw this type in my yard, Bombus impatiens. It's the common eastern bumblebee. It's always easy to identify when you see this T1 as yellow. That's that. Bombus griseocolus, the brown belted bumblebee, very, very common in the state of Illinois. You'll always see this, or most often see this brown, but then directly under it, you'll see black. And Bombus bimaculatus, the 2-spotted bumblebee. I love when they're just weighed down with all this pollen. You really want to see that. It means they're doing well in their environment and collecting lots of goodies for their hive. Bombus oricomus, and again, I'm not a biologist, so I may pronounce this wrong, but it's the black and gold bumblebee, and they are just so robust. You just know it when you see them. They're really just significantly larger than other bees that you might encounter. Bombus citrinus is a lemon cuckoo bumblebee. It's actually considered a social parasite, where they go in and take over the nest of some of these other bumblebees that I've mentioned, and they kill off the queen, and then all of the workers in that nest start raising the babies of this parasite. And then Bombus vagans is another one. It's the half black bumblebee. You'll quite often see them closer to more woodland areas. Bombus fervitus, the yellow bumblebee, is considered a vulnerable species. It's just a gorgeous, gorgeous bee. It's a real, I just love when I happen upon them. If this species relative abundance continued to decline at the same rate, it would go extinct in the next 70 to 80 years. That would just be just a travesty. So I hope that we can all come away from this planting more plants to feed our bees. And of course, then the Bombus finis, the rusty patch bumblebee, is on the endangered list, and we've kind of talked about that already. But the way you can distinguish if it's a rusty patch is you will see a distinct yellow line underneath the patch of rust, which is one of your first cues to know that it should be reported. So brown on yellow, report that fellow is a good way to try to remember that. So with all of this knowledge that we have of our bees having some troubles and the numbers in decline, it can be discouraging, but you really do have a lot of power in the choices you make. You want to wine and dine them. You want to put some things in your yard that can feed them, that they can take to their nest and raise more babies. So put out a good spread for them and pick some plant choices that support the most life. I really think starting with trees and shrubs, the woody species that have significant impact, the bones of your landscape is a good place to start. But when you're making your choices, you're picking native, you're picking something that can actually support the most life. I love the website nwf.org. The Native Plant Finder feature on there is super helpful because it tells you how many species a plant you're considering supports. Morton Arboretum has been a good source for classes, for educational purposes. And if you were to really look at the typical suburban landscape, I even think this number is generous, but this said, this was something that I took from pollinatorgarden.org and with permission from Annie White. She said 20 to 30% of our suburban landscapes have native plant species in them, but she's recommending that we increase that to 70 to 80% of native species from local genotypes in your region. So, this doesn't happen overnight, even for my own yard. It's a work in progress, but just one plant at a time, like Catherine said in the beginning. You want to offer a diverse array, and then they might stay, they might get cozy and make themselves at home. You pick 10 to 20 carefully chosen plants. And like I said, you can just start with one. For me, I didn't put everything in all at once. I've just kind of taken my time each year and intentionally made improvements. And it's definitely been a learning progress. I included this picture of the queen bimaculatus on the left because in the spring when they wake up, they really wake up hungry and ready to fuel up. So anything you can get into your garden that is going to bloom in that early spring is significantly important to support those queens as they wake up, because they're the only living representation of their species. All the queens that came and emerged out of the nest in the fall, they're the only ones that make it through the winter. The rest of the nest dies off. And so it's pretty important to consider spring blooming offerings in your yard as much as possible, but you're going for things that are going to bloom all season, spring, summer, and fall, in a variety of shapes and sizes and complexity. Creating microclimates in your yard is important as well. Having layers and a mosaic of different things, even wind protected areas, is super important, because I've noticed on particularly windy days, it influences their foraging behavior and how they're able to get around. You're shooting, I remember reading this, that you're shooting for 3 forbs to be blooming at one time, depending on the season. I know I'm not quite there yet in my yard with everything. I still have lulls and I have the gaps to fill, but we're all a work in progress. Not putting just random seed out as much as possible. You're doing large swaths of a particular species of plant. That's going to make it a lot more efficient for them when they're collecting and foraging, bringing back to their nest. Installing a pollinator friendly lawn is certainly something worth considering. That means, and not overlooking native grasses and sedges. That's super important, and we're going to talk about it in a little bit here for nesting and whatnot, but really using native grasses and sedges in your whole overall planning is important. But if you don't have a yard, certainly there's other ways of getting plugged into your community to help. You can help by greening vacant lots in your community. You plug in with all the local environmental groups that are doing restoration work. You could even adopt a friend's yard, which I did with my friend who has MS and doesn't get out much. She's not able to get outside much. I helped with our church putting in a pollinator garden visible to her from inside so she could see pollinators coming to visit her yard. So I'm probably going to go through this part quick because I want to get to be able to get to the end. But a lot of these, this certainly isn't an exhaustive list, but this is a list that I've been that I put together of spring bumblebee favorites to consider as you're thinking about what you might want to bring to your space. At least for our region, these are all definitely heavy hitting options. I put asterisks by things that are considered superfoods or particularly attractive to the bumblebees. Really just using your observation skills on your hikes, you start to really get a good feel for what is attractive to them. I've noticed in the late spring, sometimes there's this lull where a lot of the early blooming flowers kind of quiet down and there's not much going on. And at least in my yard, I'll see them on dandelions and clovers. It seems like they kind of fill this little gap when things are kind of low and quiet before the big show in later the late early summer and whatnot, where more things start coming in. But it's really kind of cool when you see them showing up, but on the milkweed in my yard in particular. So 40 billion years we happen to spend on our lawns and keeping our perfect monoculture lawns. And if you look at how many species that supports, that's 0. And I consider that kind of lame. But I would challenge people to start kind of relaxing a little on their yard. I know this is still an ongoing conversation in my household, but I've been letting more of these things go and, stopped with the lawn treatments that I did years ago and trying to allow for more species to be in my lawn in suburbia here. And a study that Marla Spivak did showed that just by making these changes to more of a bee lawn type of presentation, you could accommodate so many more species by making that choice. And this is a little visitor I had up north at our family cottage. It's Bombus terricola, a yellow banded bumblebee who's a close cousin to the rusty patch and also in a vulnerable state. And it's visiting clover in my yard up there. I've definitely been just letting that try to take over, even though it's technically a non-native. It's a super rich source that you can tell the bees really seek that out. And I guess I'm not a purist in that regard because I don't take the clover away out of my yard. In early summer, these are all heavy hitters. If you can put in purple or white prairie clover, a nice large patch of it in your yard, they will just come and just thank you. They would be so happy. That's a powerhouse, I would say, choice from anything I've observed. And the purple coneflower as well is also one of those superfoods that seems to be very attractive to them. Shrubs like lead plant, buttonbush, St. John's wort, New Jersey tea, certainly things to consider when you're making your choices. And here again, these are all just pictures I've taken over the years in my yard and along the way of mid to late summer options that you might consider installing in your yard, just one plant at a time. If you have to pick one off this page, oh, it would be so hard to pick, but really Monarda fistulosa, it's something that's just so attractive to them. It's just super fun to see a large patch of it and how much they just all are attracted to that plant. But in my yard in particular, hyssop has been a strong one too, and Joe pieweed as well. They're really all, you can't lose with any of the choices on this page. In the fall, I've started to add more varieties of goldenrod and aster to my yard. And it's actually a nice time of year to bumblebee watch, because you know, they're all more concentrated. The hive numbers have gone up to a certain point, and they all concentrate more on these different flowers. So it's definitely fun to get out with your camera and chase them around in the fall. So now that we've wined and dined the bees, we need to make sure that that the queens have a nice little place to chill. They want to be pampered, and they need a cozy place to land over the winter and spend their time. Because if you think about it, these future queens, which they call gynes, they're going to spend 6 months of their life cycle below ground or below these leaves. So we really need to focus on making sure our yards have these spaces for them and not be so obsessed with being tidy, tidy, tidy. So maybe really just have some areas in your yard where you're allowing the leaf litter to just stay. Particularly in the fall, when the queens are looking to burrow down. And really, a lot of this information is still coming to light. There's so much that we just are still learning, quite frankly, about the overwintering habits of queens. But anything you can do that might help, at least is a step in the right direction. Some of the anecdotal reports are that they like to be found 3 inches below the surface of loose soils or duff. And the overstory, they'll pick areas where there is a significant overstory. I highly recommend going to soft landings. The information that Heather Holm has just put out, it's beautiful illustration. Just trust me, go to that website, pollinators.nativeplants.com, and take a look at soft landings. She's really trying to help educate about the significance of making these soft spaces for not just bumblebee queens but other insects to have a safe zone. But they sometimes are known for finding slope surfaces. Maybe, I think if we're talking about overwintering, maybe more north facing, but so much to still learn about bumblebees. For nesting, they definitely prefer, a lot of times underground abandoned rodent nests, clump forming undisturbed native grasses. I underline that because I've really observed this even up north, and that is I've allowed a lot of this space on our property that had been mowed previously. I've allowed it to just start growing in, and you really just see all the little rodent trails going in and amongst all of these clumps of sedges and grass, and you really get this an understanding that this is perfect habitat for bees. And as time's gone on, I'm seeing a little more showing up on the property up north. They like tree roots, brush or compost piles, dry cavities above ground, rock walls, maybe even bird nests and whatnot. If you ever do see a nest, there's different places that would want to know, different research, people doing research, like Queen Quest is one that comes to mind. So it's certainly something worth reporting, because it's something that can help those that are doing more dedicated research in this area to have a better understanding of the bumblebee behavior. So do what you can from a land management standpoint. I'm going to blow through this really fast. Leave the leaves as much as possible. Leave your perennials intact through the winter. I've done that in my property, and the birds thank me. It's so fun throughout the winter to see them still coming to the Joe Pye weed, picking off seeds, or the hyssop. But they do use that structure as well. Leave your stalks, and Heather Holm has talked about this if anybody's followed her like I have, and 20 inches, leaving your trimmings as mulch. Don't spring clean until temperatures are consistently over 50 degrees or greater than 32 degrees overnight, which is usually for us in mid-May. As much as possible, just keep thinking about shrinking your lawn down little bits by little bits, minimizing your weed and feed treatments, mow less often if you have to. All these steps are helpful. If you do have a property where you do some burning, only doing a third of the habitat is advisable. Doing patchy burns, kind of leaving skips. And I've even read that doing it in the winter after a hard frost may be helpful and not destroying existing bumblebees that are bedded down. So another thing that I've started doing more of, at least, or thinking more about, is collecting and sharing seeds and plants that you have in your yard. Some of the ones in my yard I've gotten from other friends as well. And back to the no pesticides talk, let's just leave it at that. Just avoid pesticides. So if you didn't know, honeybee keeping is kind of this trendy thing. It's increased 45% worldwide over the last 50 years. And, as much as that's, interesting, honeybees are not endangered. I don't think they're at any risk of being endangered, at least to my knowledge. And so I think we really have to start thinking kind of outside of this box of honeybees, and certainly give them credit for everything that they provide to humanity in the service of agriculture. But from a ecological standpoint, shifting our focus and kind of thinking outside of the honeybee box, and becoming more of a backyard native bumblebee holder is kind of what I would call it. I just would challenge people to start thinking a little more that way, because it's been very rewarding for me. This is a little bumblebee nesting box. I haven't had any queen come and adopt it yet, but I'm hopeful. I have seen little rodents, evidence of rodents, so I keep hoping, well, maybe eventually a queen will adopt it. But I can't tell you how many nature centers I've gone to where they have honeybee observation hives. Those are super cool. I can see how, from an educational standpoint, that's helpful for kids especially. But I'd love to see a shift, even in nature centers, toward having more solitary, bee observation boxes like this one on the right here I have in my backyard. It has this little latch where you can open it up and you actually can see evidence of native bees that have been visiting and making their little cells and their little babies. And it's super cool. Highly recommend considering something like that if you're able, if you are involved in educating young humans. So how many flowers does it take to make 1 pound of honey? In case you have not seen this statistic, it is 2 million. So if you were to look around your neighborhood, and maybe you're still flirting with this idea, of maybe you think, I'd like to become a honeybee keeper and put one in my backyard. If you don't see 2 million flowers in your vicinity, then maybe it's not such a good idea. So I really love this quote by Elaine Evans of University of Minnesota. Before you do any beekeeping, you need to work on becoming a habitat restoration garden expert or community activist, getting lots of habitats out there for bees in the area surrounding where you live. So really just check, take inventory, check out what's going on in your own yard and around you. And I just would challenge everyone to kind of be more community minded in that regard. So in our area, this is kind of an example of the wonderful organizations within McHenry County that I've been very involved in. I've on a voluntary basis worked with McHenry County Conservation District in kind of a pilot program for volunteers, where I do bumblebee surveys at a couple of their sites, and just trying to get a handle on maybe some of the species that are visiting their sites and kind of keep some of that data. All of these organizations have amazing superhero people, humans that are willing to pour into you and answer questions. I'm sure your area where you live has a similar kind of array of these awesome organizations, even just like what Sag Moraine native plant community is doing in your area. To go on those garden walks, just really develop a sense of where you are, what's historically occurred there, finding out how to help get involved in healing the land, and you'll find yourself kind of responding to that in a real positive way. And here's kind of the natural evolution for me doing what I do, is just that I recognize we need some organization, and we need some there's opportunities I've taken to educate others and disperse materials and just help try to clear up confusion about honeybees and yellow jackets, and help people. I've even helped people kind of try to get over some of the fears they've had of stinging insects and whatnot. And I just consider it a joy to be able to do that. And I appreciate Alma here on the left, who has joined me on those efforts in the past. And so really, it's been a family affair. We've kind of come full circle from those days of catch and release bumblebee, catch and release that the kids did when they were younger. How it's kind of played out for us is we've got an artist in the family who, you know, a lot of this is showing up in her art. We have surveys. My husband is kind of my bumblebee bodyguard. He has accompanied me on a lot of the surveys that I've done, as well as Sylvia on the upper right, who is super helpful at some of the fairs that I've done. My son, Mitchell, he likes to help on the restoration work days that we do at Boone Creek Conservation Site. And I think I kind of have to bribe him with donuts, but he's all in on this. And my daughter Isabel on the lower left, how this is played out for her is that she's choosing a path in water resources at the college, Stevens Point, University of Wisconsin, Stevens Point. So I couldn't be more proud that she's getting into invertebrates and aquatic insects and works in a lab up there, and is really taking this to a whole other level. So other ways we've been involved in our community is through our schools. Our junior high, we did work days with some of the students that were just so bummed about being cooped up all the time, staring at screens. It just seemed like there was a real hunger to get out and just physically do something. And this was something we were able to encourage this group of youngsters to do. And we took out a bunch of honeysuckle that was established along this tree line at the junior high. And our church also received a grant from WPPC. And this was like it was just something I'm just so proud of, because I really, it's kind of where my personal faith kind of aligned with this desire, to help the bumblebees and whatnot. And we were able to get the support of our elders and the leadership at the church to get this grant and install over 1,000 square feet of native plants that we all got together and installed. And I love this, even just seeing this little girl on the right helping out, putting mulch on our piles, but they all took this job very seriously. The kids of the church helped install all of the native plants. We sent people home with their own native plants that day that they could install in their own yards. There was a lot of education that occurred in the process. And the whole congregation got together, putting them in all of these islands that we had. And it was a really beautiful way of cultivating life in our neighborhood. And we saw results right away. We actually put labels out just so people could you kind of reinforce what the name of the plant was, and they actually could see these, life occurring on this. It's just been really a real joy to see kids interacting with this environment. And then that first year that we did this installation, that installed all our plants, it was kind of almost by divine appointment. It seems kind of dramatic to say that, but for me, this was kind of a big deal. But this video kind of shows you who showed up after we put all our native plants in. And you can hopefully see this video. It's a rusty patch, and it was kind of like a goosebump inducing kind of experience to kind of see them showing up after that first year we did that. And unfortunately, I really had my eyes out the following years, and I haven't seen any return, but there has still been, immense enjoyment and engagement with the community, and anybody that visits our church, is seeing this, all the different life visiting. And this last year with the drought, I think all of the native plants still were hanging in there and doing well. So I'm kind of going to wrap it up and leave you with this challenge that I kind of did for myself. It was a personal challenge in my neighborhood back. If you look back at when COVID hit, it was kind of a little shell shocked, and so many unknowns back in March of 2020. I had canceled vacation plans, and I was really, kind of processing through that disappointment. And I became intentional about wanting to see and document each day what new species I could encounter in my yard. And you can kind of see from the squirrel picture, that's kind of a feel for what my backyard looks like. We do still mow parts of our yard because we're trying to be nice neighbors and not go completely wild, but it's always a delicate balance. But anyways, I decided every day I would take a picture of something new, some new life form as I coped through COVID, and I called it my backyard neighbor challenge. And I really didn't take myself seriously. I wasn't going for like perfect pictures or anything like that. I wanted a picture of this turkey, but he always escaped me. It's the worst picture ever. So I kind of just poke fun at myself that it's like, kind of reminded me of that Sasquatch turkey, just always escaping the camera. But all told, it was a beautiful experience where it really opened my eyes at what's in my neighborhood, what's not just in my backyard. I considered my neighbor, my backyard neighbor to be anything I could walk to from where I live, not just my actual property, but anything within walking distance of where I lived. And I did this throughout all of the stay-at-home order for COVID, which ended up being about 71 days. And in that time, I saw, I documented 32 birds, 17 plants, 10 insects, 9 mammals, 2 reptiles. It was quite I don't know, I'm going to treasure this body of images that I collected because it really was restorative in its own kind of way at a time that was just very uncertain. And it was a time when you could feel potentially alone because you're more isolated, but by really just zeroing in on all these different creatures in my own area, you didn't feel so alone after all. And so I liked this particular study that Aaron Schwartz did that analyzed 100,000 tweets. And of those tweets, anyone that once a person visited a park or went outside, it triggered a spike in happiness. And this afterglow lasted from 1 to 4 hours. And that so that he analyzed all the tweets that people had after going to the park and realized that spending time in nature, people were much more positive, much less self-obsessed. And so I think I kind of felt I experienced that during this backyard neighbor challenge that I did. And I guess I would challenge anyone listening, to consider doing your own little version of something like that in your own neighborhood. You might be surprised who's showing up. And like I would never have imagined that I would see a beaver within walking distance of my house. And I did on day 33. And so I kind of ended up that challenge with this bubbling bee. And it was kind of the perfect way to end that journey, like when the stay-at-home order ended, I just felt like, okay, that challenge is over. But I could have kept going. There's just so much to discover just right in your own backyard. And you really do kind of lose yourself in it. In the case of this bee, I had never seen one do this before. So it was just really, it was a type of experience that it kind of led to more questions, like, and if I had to Google and figure out what it was doing. And it's just a great experience. And so maybe if you kind of start taking a closer look in your backyard, I hope you start seeing little patches of rust like this showing up maybe in your plantings. And if you do, I'd love to hear about it, because I'll share your excitement, because I think it's just a wonderful thing. It's a real blessing when it does happen. So I guess that's it. I've got a list here of various websites or books, or the things that you might want to consider checking out. If you have any additional questions, I'd be willing to answer them.
Okay, would you mind leaving that slide up while we do questions? Because
Oh,
people
that's
will
fine.
be taking some time to write those down.
Sure. Okay, so just keep my screen sharing going then. Okay.
Yeah, that would be great.
Mhm.
This was terrific.
Thank you.
I noticed that, I mean, if there's anything positive that came out of COVID, it was people having more time to see what really all is out there.
That's
And I
right. It
can
was.
tell you, I spent so much time in the yard staring at insects. If anybody saw me, like, with my camera and my
That's great. I know. I think it really was a blessing to have that extra time, and in a way, um, and really I was just craving getting outside and just being outside, because you're just spending so much more time indoors.
And I
Uh,
hope, if anything, that some of this renewed appreciation of the outdoors, I hope some of that sticks as COVID recedes.
right.
That could be one, if there is such a thing, positive thing of it. But we do have a few questions for you.
I'll
Uh,
do my best.
Somebody was asking, they couldn't follow the male-female identification. Could you just
Okay.
briefly give that again?
Yeah, I kind of went through that fast, but really, males tend to have longer antenna, like an additional segment. They also have one additional segment on their turja. So if you actually have a decent enough picture where you can see each distinct line, you'll see, I believe it's 7 in a male versus 6 in a female. Don't quote me on that, but they have an additional segment. Females have a little bump, like it's really just, I could try to dig back on the picture, but they just have a little, the more you look at them, you'll see it, just a little bump on the bottom turja. And then the males looks like a little more rounded, I would say, and less distinct. There are some bumblebee species, particularly the Bombus oricomus and Griseocolus, the brown belted and the black and gold. The males have these gigantic eyes. So if you see any in your yard now, especially because you won't necessarily see males early on in the season, like April, May. You might, but really the nests, my understanding of them, the way things work is it's the queen wakes up in the spring, the workers are all females, and at a certain point later in the life of the nest, the males start coming out of the nest and seeking out, mates. And so you kind of start getting a better feel for the timeline of this, the more you spend time chasing bee bottoms, hopefully that, yeah.
We also had one other question. Are they social? My husband mowed over a nest and was stung multiple times.
Oh,
Thinking they were solitary.
thinking that the bumblebees were
Yes.
solid.
The
Okay.
bumblebees are pretty much our only social native bee, correct?
They are social. I believe some types of sweat bees can also be technically social, but they're the highest level of sociality. And I really have to default to the fact that I just read a lot. I haven't gone to college for this. So I do know they are social, and maybe my friend Alma can, chime in with this because she's a biologist and she can explain these things better than I can.
Yes, can we ask you, Alma, to come
If she's
on and
still
turn
with
on your
us.
camera and your mic? We're very thrilled to have you here as a guest. You've worked with Brandie and you have a lot of experience studying bumblebees, and we'd love to hear a little bit about what you're doing.
Hi, yes, okay. Can you see me?
Yes, we can. Hello.
Okay. Yeah, hi, I'm Alma Shaggy, and a little about me, I'm a biologist. Currently I work for the United States Geological Survey as a bumblebee surveyor, specifically for rusty patch bumblebee in the North Illinois region. And before that, I spent 2 years working for the Illinois Natural History Survey in a similar position while working towards my master's degree in natural resources and environmental science. So I just want to first affirm that Brandie is an incredibly knowledgeable person. She downplays her knowledge a lot, but everything she said here is, right on the money. I guess I want to add that Bee Spotter is a great resource for ID, and they have a lot of helpful PDFs that, diagram the different species and males versus females. So if you want to get into IDing bumblebees, Bee Spotter is a great place to start learning that. And once you get into it, not that hard. It's like birding. And yeah, and also I want to say that citizen scientists really have an important impact. It's like posting your bumblebee pictures to iNatural. There are bumblebee biologists who are looking at those photos, and we're using that data to update our assessments of ranges, how the rusty patch population is doing, how other bumblebee species are doing. So, I just want to say that even if you're just taking pictures in your yard, it has a lot of value. So, I urge you to take up bee holding, bumblebee holding. So, yeah.
Thank
And
you.
yeah.
Wonderful. We have a couple more questions for either one of you. So James asked, what about mason bees? Aren't they the first bees to feed on the ephemerals in spring? And are they part of the bumblebee group?
Brandie, do you want to go first? I'm happy to follow up whatever you say, but yeah.
I'm still learning a lot about mason bees. I know I don't just take pictures of bumblebees. I'm still learning to identify a lot of our native bees, to be quite honest. I love that challenge, but I can't speak to what the question is.
From what I have read, they're not part of the bumblebee group. Mason bees are solitary bees.
Well, right.
But you're right, James, they do come out in spring. So probably like the first bees that we have out in early spring on those ephemerals would be the mason bees and the queen bumblebees, I would guess.
Right. So they're more tunnel nesting.
And I guess I just want to add that mason bees, there's not just a single species. There's many different species of mason bees. So it's kind of like with bumblebees, there's not just one species, there's a lot of them. And I'm also like Brandie, that I'm still learning my native bees outside of bumblebees. So bumblebees they're kind of the gateway group because they're relatively easy to identify compared to other native bee species. So, but again, there's a lot of resources online, and iNaturalist is a great place to start if you are into photography and photograph the bees you see and you want to know what they are. There's a lot of people on there who are excellent at identifying various native bee species. So, yeah.
And Debbie asked if you have a name of a resource that you would most recommend, that would list and give photos of all of the bees, the native bee species in Northern Illinois.
A good place to start is I love the search feature on iNaturalist. It's not exhaustive. It certainly helps you start to get a feel for the diversity in a particular area. So even today, I was curious, well, how many, you can actually enter, Illinois, and you can filter for 2021, how many rusty patch sightings have there been? So as an example, there was 125 rusty patch sightings throughout the state of Illinois. But you can also enter you can narrow it down, if not just specifically a type of bee, but all bees. And then it gives you any bee that's been submitted to iNaturalist, and you can start, like I said, you get a picture of the different diversity, and it helps you along in your education. I know there's plenty of books and resources. All of the Heather Holm books are a great place to start the conversation and really just start flipping through, and you get introduced to all of these others, the other bees besides bumblebees. I have to admit to being really just having blinders on, for bumblebees, but
well, they're so cute and fuzzy.
Well, I know, but they really are a gateway bee to the larger conversation.
And would you give us the name of those glasses again that you recommend for if people want to get a closer look at the bees to try to?
Yeah, I'll do my best to
species
go
they're looking
back to that slide, and they really are a wonderful thing to have. They're very lightweight. My husband brings them every time we're out, and I can safely say he is a bumblebee holder now, and as the rest of my family is. But it's a Pentax brand, Papillo 2 binocular. It's extreme close focusing.
Extremely close focusing. Wonderful. Thank you very much.
My pleasure.
This was absolutely wonderful.
Thank you.
I love your passion and your enthusiasm, and just thank God we have people like you out there fighting the fight and raising awareness.
Thank you for the opportunity. I really appreciate it, and keep doing what you're doing. Keep on keeping on.
Thanks, everyone. Have a great night, and go out tomorrow and look at bumblebees.
Yep.